Hello and welcome to week 5 of the Make Do Create project. Over the last 4 weeks we've been taking a look at all sorts of animation and we're nearly done getting through the 12 principles. In this video we're going to talk about exaggeration, and timing. Last week we took a look at stop motion animation and we're going to continue in a third dimension by taking a look at 3D computer animation. "3D animation follows the same principles as all the rest. In 3D animation, you manipulate puppets in a virtual form and set keyframes in a timeline. While in 2D, you can start animating from the very first drawing. Before a 3D animator can start, a character model must be made, and that model must have all the joints and controls applied to it in order for it to be animated. This is kind of like putting all the skeletons and bones into a stop-motion animated character. To make a 3D animation, you first have to have a 3D animation software. Most movie studios would make these in-house themselves to suit their animation style, their workflow, their render engine, and all sorts of things. And while we looked at stop motion as being kind of like miniature movie sets, you can create all that and more within the 3D animation software. When you're drawing in 2D animation, you draw what the audience sees. If an object or a person isn't seen, the animator simply doesn't draw it. Whereas in 3D, all of the parts are there all the time in a 3D space, and you have to animate them even if they're out of sight for just a few frames. When a character's walking away from the camera, a 2D animator would draw the character smaller and smaller and smaller for each frame to show this. In 3D, the character is really walking away into a 3D space and appears to be smaller, but the character model doesn't change size. To capture your animation, there's a virtual camera in the software that you can direct at your animation. The advantage of 3D is that you can make one animation and move the camera all around that for hundreds of different angles. If you wanted to do that in 2D, you'd have to draw the same animation again and again from the perspective of a different camera angle. Before we go into our workshop, I'm going to talk about our first animation principle of today's video, which is exaggeration. It's pretty self-explanatory. Exaggeration backs the idea of show, not tell. If you want to show a character is angry, you can have them have an angry face, sure, but you can exaggerate that by having them turn red with steam coming out of their ears. Exaggeration really emphasizes the motion that you're doing, and you'd be surprised at how far you can push a pose before it looks weird. So over the last couple of weeks doing the animations, we've been using apps that are available on the phone and tablet, but when moving to 3D animation it becomes a little bit more advanced, and there aren't that many apps out there for 3D animation, at least for free. There's one or two that look pretty good, but they cost a bit of money and I don't want to have you spending anything on this. The apps that are available for free, they don't really delve into creating 3D animation using keyframes and timelines and all the stuff that we're used to. Some of them would let you set up a scene and a character, but they do the animation part for you, and that's not what we're about. We want to learn how to animate in 3D. So today I'm going to show you some 3D animation software that's free and it's available in your browser. It is called Clara.io. It is free, and the only thing you have to do is make a little profile, because that's where all your stuff is going to be saved. Simply just Clara.io, and then you make a username, you enter your email, and you enter your password. And then you just start creating. And we're going to use the free version, so just start editing with that. And then once you've selected your plan, this is the page you're going to see here. This is sort of like your home page where all of the stuff that you make will be saved, and you'll be able to see it here. And this also has video tutorials available, and it has a user guide available in case you get stuck while doing this by yourself. So we're just going to create a new scene, create empty scene, and then you can just name it whatever you want. I'm just going to click this one here, but you can leave the rest and then create. Once you hit create, this is the screen you're going to see, and this is what we're going to be working with today. So right now we have got in the center bit our sort of staging area, but it's showing us 4 at a time, and we don't need 4. So we're just going to pick one. I'm going to pick this one, and this very top button in the corner is going to be expand. So we're going to click that, And that's just going to fill the screen. So we're going to be doing a bouncing ball, so we have to create our bouncing ball. And in this program, it's really simple. We've just got like a little library of shapes up here, and we can just click on sphere, and a little sphere pops in for us. Now, if we click on the sphere, we've selected it, and we have these little arrows to choose from to help us move it. And I'm just going to guide you up here to the top. We've got our move tool, we've got our rotate tool, and we've got our scale tool. So we're on move right now. We can go to rotate, and we can go to scale. So you can move it left and right, up and down, side to side. And I'm just going to go up to edit, undo, to keep it in there. Now this is a little bit close for the animation that we want to do. So I'm going to show you how to move around in the scene. If you use your scroll wheel, you can scroll out as far as you like, scroll in and out, and that gives us a better perspective. If you're on an Apple, if you hold down Command and left mouse button, or if you're on a PC, hold down Control and left mouse button, and you can hold and drag the scene around like this, any way you like. If we hold Control and middle mouse button, we get to drag the scene around like this. Now I say you got completely lost, and you're like, oh god, I've lost everything, what do I do now? If you press F on the keyboard, it brings you right back to the center where your object is. I'm just going to scroll out now. Okay? I'll remind you of these as we go along as I'm using them. So right now I'm just using Command and left mouse button to view this little guy. Okay, so we're going to select, and it's already on the move tool up here, and you can click these, drag them about, and put this little sphere in a 3D space. So this grid laid out for us, we're going to use this as sort of like the ground for our bouncing ball animation. And once you're comfortable with the movement controls, we can start doing the bouncing ball animation. And you'll notice there is a timeline at the bottom here. We're going to use this to keyframe the movement of the ball. If you go over to the side here, it's on poly mesh now because that's what we selected. If we just get rid of that, because we won't need it, you get these four, and we click on transform, you're going to see translation, rotation, and scale with these little numbers beside it. You'll notice if I click on the red arrow, which is X, and I move it, you'll see that the X translation has moved. And if you just think of translation as moving, and if you want to reset it, you can just go 0. The same with scale. If we wanted to scale this ball up, it's scaled up 3 times. You can see that there. So we've got the ball in the center. We are at the very beginning of the timeline. If we want to save the sphere in this position, we just click on translation, and you'll see that has turned red. That has given us a little orange notch in the timeline. That's shown us that we have keyframed the ball in this position. And say we go to frame 10, and we move the ball over, and we click translation again, that has given us another keyframe. And the cool thing about it is, if we play that, it does the movement for you. So if we were working with flip-a-clip or 2D animation, and we did 1, 2 keyframes, it would look something like 1, 2, because we haven't done any in-betweens. But the 3D animation software does the in-betweens for you. It knows that you started here and you want to get to here, so obviously it's going to fill it in for you, which is really handy. So we're going to start with our bouncing ball animation now. We're going to use this grid as sort of the ground, and we're going to start our bouncing ball animation over to the side. We're going to have it start quite high up. Okay? So we click on our ball, we make sure we're at the very beginning at 0, and we click translation. And we can see from the orange marker that has keyframed that for us. So 0 is our starting position, and we always want to keyframe the starting position. So we've keyframed it to start at the very top. Now we move in the timeline to where we want the next frame to be. In this case, this ball is going to be falling quite quickly, so around 10, maybe 7 or so. And then we click, and we just drag, we want it to down and forward, and then again, click translation, and that sets the keyframe. And we can drag along the timeline to do that. Like good. Okay, so we can move on, scroll over, 12, forward a bit, up a bit, and translation. Alright, and I'm just doing the very highest and the very lowest points. We're not doing any in-betweens now, we can come back and do that after. So I'm moving to about 17 now and doing translation. So we've got start, bounce 1, up, bounce 2, and it's not going to bounce as high as the starting position because it's losing a lot of force. Although, I suppose we could have that be a little bit higher. So you can go over a keyframe that you have translated and you can change it just as long as you're making the change over the keyframe that you want to make a change to. And then when you press translation again, it'll overwrite what you did before. So yeah, that's a bit easier. And we want to move that a bit more forward, a bit more evenly forward. So we're going to move that to maybe another square, translation. And it's really nice to have a timeline where you can scroll and see your progress like this because you can just make changes on the fly like that. Okay. Yep. And then we'll go, we're on 17, so we'll go to about 20. Oh, see what I did there? I dragged the keyframe instead of the keyframe marker. So the red is where you are looking on the timeline. So right now we're on 32, but this keyframe is on 20 and we don't want it to be on 20. We want it to be on about 17. So 1, 2, 3. So that's okay. So just be careful you're not dragging your keyframes and you're dragging your little marker. So you want it to be on maybe about 21. You can see what frame you're at here. And you'll notice that the gaps are getting a little bit smaller because we are thinking about the timing. And timing is the other animation principle that we're going to talk about today. Timing is sort of the principle that conveys how quickly something moves and how long it stays still. And we do that by adding and taking away frames and by editing the spacing that the frames are at. So the basic rule to follow with timing is that the less frames there are, the faster the ball's moving. The more frames there are, the slower the ball's moving. And if the frames are evenly spaced out, it's moving at a constant speed. So since the frames aren't very evenly spaced out here, it's going to be changing speed. And that makes sense because the ball's going to be its fastest at the very beginning and then it's going to slow down. And we aren't doing any in-betweens yet, so the ball looks like it's moving pretty fast here. But once we add the in-betweens in and the slow in and slow out and everything, it'll look more realistic and the timing will come into play better there. So we're at about 21 now, and we want to go to maybe 25 or so. And again, just sort of keep it an even movement, just sort of eyeball it. There's nothing wrong with that, as you can sort of tell without really knowing why if something looks bad. And I think 1, 2, I think that's a bit high there. So we're just going to make that a little bit lower, almost half. Keyframe that. And again, we're just looking at how far it's moving here, so I want to move this one back a little bit because when the ball's slowing down, it's not going to have a lot of force to move very far. And again, with this one, we want to move it back ever so slightly. We'll do a few more here. 20 or so. I'm just going to move it up a wee tiny bit, over a wee tiny bit. Translation, and then basically 31 or so. Back down, over a little tiny bit. Translation. Okay, so that's as far as I'm going to have the ball go, just from here, boom, 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 boom. And it's a very short animation, it's just over 1 second. So we've kind of very roughly portrayed that the ball is falling from a height and then bounce, and then as it's bouncing, it's slowing down and the height of the ball is decreasing. It looks very choppy now though, so that's where we're going to add in all the in-betweens that are going to make it look smooth. So since our animation is very short. There is no need to have 200 frames here. We're not going to be doing that today. So I'm just going to make the end frame of this timeline 40, and we can see the frames spaced out much more evenly across the screen here, and start frame is still 0, and we just did that by going to File, View Settings. It brought up this menu, and then we clicked on Timeline, and start frame 0, end frame 40, and that's fine. And then we want to go back to our objects, so we click on Sphere. We can get rid of Polymesh and go back to Transform, and then that gets back to this menu here. Okay, so we go back here, and we can see it's much easier to manipulate the timeline when we've got the right amount of frames on display. So I think the first thing that we can do is add in some slow in and slow out, and we do that by just adding a few extra frames. Now, even if we start at 0 and we click from 1 to 2 to 3, even though the ball is in a position, they aren't keyframed. So if we keyframe them, then it'll sort of overwrite the position of the ball now, because it's just the computer that's guessing where the ball's going to go between these, and it's making it very mechanical and robotic looking. So we're going to edit the timing now by adding slow in and slow out. So we're starting at frame 1. Let's go to frame 2, and if you look at frame 1 and frame 2, they're quite far away from each other in terms of, you know, position, and it's making that fall really fast. So we're just gonna look and see where the beginning is, and then we're gonna sort of move that to be very, very close to the beginning, and we're gonna hit transition to keyframe that. And now it's got a nice slow. And even from 2 to 3, that is a little bit far as well. So we're gonna go to 3 and just sort of move that transition. From 2 to 3, it's a little bit jittery, so we're going to go over to 3 again, move it over slightly so it's just underneath 2. Translation, check. Okay. And then from 3 to 4, if we want to just move it slightly out this way, and we're creating an arc this way. Transition. Two to 3 still looks a bit funny. You might just remove this keyframe and have it just go to 4. Sometimes you just have to see what works best and looks best. So not having a keyframe at 3 and working in 2s instead of 1s makes this look a bit smoother, because it was a very small difference there. So we can get rid of 3. So that's a little bit of slow in, and we're going to do that to the rest of them as well. Now, when it gets to this stage, it's going to be from 4 to 7. It's going to be going pretty fast, so there's not going to be any slowing into the bounce, if you get me. It's going to be slowing in from the drop, and then similarly, the bounce is going to make it bounce up quite quickly. So the slow movement is going to be between, it's going to be 11, 12, and 13, because at the very top, it's losing its power and it's going to drop down again. So 12, basically just have them a little bit closer together. Translation. And then with 13, have it a bit closer to 12 as well. Translation. And then we can scroll and see that it's slowing at the top there, at the peak. And then it's going to speed up again and bounce. And then at this point, it's bounced once already, and this is the second bounce. So overall, it's going to lose some power, and it's going to start getting way slower. And we're going to be adding in way more frames in between towards the end, because the overall action is getting slower, not just the individual parts of the action. So this is the very top bit. So 20. Have that be a little bit closer to 21, and we're going to have that be a little bit closer to 21, and it's just little movements that I'm making each time. And again, for the very last one, sometimes it helps to just zoom in and look at it from a slightly different angle once it gets down to the really specific ones. And you're probably thinking that what much of a difference will it make making these two closer, but it does make a little tiny bit of a difference. It's hardly noticeable. Translation, this one. Translation, and then it's hit the floor there. So if we zoom out and go back to the beginning, there's a little bit of slow in, slow out happening there. We're going to add in some squash and stretch now to sort of sell this a bit more. So if we go to 7, this is where the ball hits the ground. And if we go up to scale mode, we can just scale it down. And it's going to be pretty squashed. It's going to be pretty squashed because it's like the fastest. And also you notice that it's come off the ground a bit. So we're going to go to the move tool and sort of put it back on the ground there because we want it to be realistic. And then we're going to do translation because we moved it. But since we scaled it, we're going to do translation on the scale now. So if we're doing more than one thing, we have to make sure that we keyframe both of them. Okay, so let's take a look at that. Okay, hold on. This is another thing. Remember I said at the start that we have to keyframe the very beginning? It's the same with the scale. So we haven't messed with scale before, so it thinks that this is the starting scale. We're just going to reset the scale to 1, and we're going to go to frame 0, and we're going to translate, and we're going to set a keyframe for that scale. So that's the starting scale. And then when we go to 7 then, and we scale it down, we can set the scale for that particular frame. And then we're just going to make sure it's hitting the ground. Set the translation. And you can see we want it to be squashed the moment it hits the floor. But right now, the computer is thinking, okay, so you've had a perfect circle at the beginning, and by 7, you want it to be squashed. So obviously, in the middle, you want it to be halfway squashed, but that's not what we want it to do. So the computer's really good at filling in your movements sometimes, but sometimes it's not really intuitive in the principles of animation. So we're going to have to do some stretch. So I think frame 4, we want it to be pretty much just select the sphere again. We still want it to be a perfect circle at frame 4. So if we go over here and we reset it, the scale to 1, it's a perfect circle. And we can keyframe the scale at frame 4. So if we drag, it's still a perfect circle and it's only starting to squash after frame 4. But we don't want it to start to squash anywhere before 7. So luckily, we're going to add in our stretch. We're going to go to frame 6, and this is the frame just before it hits the ground, and we're going to stretch this. So stretching it like so. And we're going to make it narrower as well, because when we're doing squash and stretch, you have to account for the mass as well. And also, it's not falling from straight down, it's sort of falling at an arc. So we're going to set the scale there, and then we're going to go to rotate. Now, let's not make the same mistake as before. Let's go to frame 1, or frame 0, and set the rotation at 0. It's at nothing right now. And then when we go back to 6, we can rotate it, with the blue one. We can rotate it like so. Just a little bit of a diagonal there. And then we can click rotate to set the keyframe. Okay, now we've got a little bit of slow in, slow out, squash and stretch. Click away to get a better sort of view of what we're doing here. So we've got perfect circle, coming down, gaining speed, squash. Okay, we need to fix the rotation on this. We just go here and we reset the rotation to 0, and then we can keyframe that. Yep, pretty happy with that. And it's going to remain that size for the rest. So we're going to have to go in and edit. Once you start messing with the rotation and the scale, there's a lot more things to keyframe every time you're going in and editing. So I recommend that you do it in the order where you do all the movement first, and then we do all the scaling after, and then we do all the rotation after. So it's sort of like you're doing it in batches of the things that you have to manipulate. So we've got the first bounce. That's almost a little batch in itself, the very first bounce. Okay, so it's almost the opposite now. So we've got the first bounce at 7 and then an 8. What we want to do is scale this. So we want to scale it long and skinny. And we want to keyframe that, remember. And we want to do some rotation. Go to rotate here. And we want to rotate it that way. And then we want to keyframe that. So just check that there. There we go. So we've got squash, stretch. So we've got speed, squash, speed, stretch. Okay, and then for 12, at 12 we want it to be a perfect circle again. So we go here and we take the scale and we just simply reset it to 1. Reset it to 1 and then we keyframe it. And it'll go back to a perfect circle because it's slowed down and the force hasn't manipulated it. So that should fill in the gaps for us. Yep. Knit it down, and again, since it is losing speed overall during the whole bouncing process, when we go to squash it again on this side, it's not going to be nearly as squashed as it was the first time because it's coming down with a bit of a slower force. Okay, so we're squashing that, and it looks a bit off because we've still got rotation on it, so just going to reset that to 0 for now. So that's a night, and then we can keyframe that. So it's squashed, but it's not as squashed as it was before. And then we also want to move it down. Fix the translation. And we want to save the scale as well. So we've saved everything there. And again, we don't want it to squash before it hits the ground, so we're going to go into the frame before, and we're going to add a little bit of stretch. And similar to the squash, it's not going to be nearly as much stretch as the first one because it's not going as fast. And we're going to keyframe that. And then we're going to rotate it as well. Oh, I should point out this traffic light system here. So in the translation part, it hasn't been changed and it hasn't been keyframed, so it's green. Rotation has been changed, but it has not been keyframed, so it's orange. And scale has been changed and has been keyframed, so it's red. So as soon as we click on this to keyframe it, it turns to red. And we're just making sure that's okay. Yeah, there we go. And again, we want to just reset this to 1. And we want to save that. And the frame before that, we just want to stretch it a bit, rotate it a bit, save those. And with this one, just reset. And it's with something like this, it's a lot of repetition. And then we want to scale again, and again, not as much squash as before. And then we also want to make sure it's hitting the ground fully, and we want to save all of that. We'll just check. And we'll just do this one here. A little bit of stretch as we're falling. And a little bit of rotation as we're falling. Save, save. And we've hit the ground. And there's almost none here, so what are we doing? And it's gone so slowly, and that there's almost no squash and stretch needed for these last ones. So another nice thing we can do is just for the final, it's stopping here, but it just stops very abruptly. So we can add a little bit of squash. Okay, so we're just going to review the whole thing. I go into animation and timeline settings, and I set the speed here to 0.7 or so. We can get a little look at the ball. And this week's movie recommendation is one you've probably all seen before, but considering it made history at being the first 3D animated film, it's only fitting that it be Toy Story. In fact, if you have the time, I recommend watching all 4 of the movies and just take in the huge advancement within the movies themselves. The choice of toys as our heroes was a smart move in the first movie, as plastic and rubber appearance of the toys suited the level of technology at the time, but now the studio is capable of showcasing the finest detail in the latest releases, letting us see a whole new variety of toys and environments that they can all hang out in. That's us for this week. We're nearly through our animation workshops. We looked at timing and exaggeration today, which leaves us only 2 left, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out what's happening next week. And as always, make sure you share what you're making with us. Thanks, and see you later.